Welcome to AuthentiCity FM, where we are continuing our January conversation about disruption. And I am joined by my friends and colleagues, Corey Spiegel and Phil Corrali. And if you have ever wondered how overalls, grape jelly, Bud Grant, kissing booths, and mint juleps all weave into one coherent framework about our next guest, stick around. I'll see you on the other side. So if you've watched or listened to the podcast, you know we do these little bits where we string together a bunch of strange, peculiar words to try to describe our guests and about this show. So I want to start with overalls. Overalls is reflective of farmers. If you wanted to be critical and make fun of a farmer, you would call somebody a Bubba, but they don't actually mean Bubba. This our guest has a horse named Bubba, and so that's the connection there. If you're wondering how grape jelly, Welch's grape jelly to be specific, fits in this, our guest once served as a prison guard and knows the recipe for making prison hooch, which is grape jelly, Wonder Bread, and a little bit of water wrapped up in a bag and fermented until it's golden and delicious. Bud Grant is a famous football coach in the state of Minnesota. He coached the Minnesota Vikings to 4 Super Bowls, of which they didn't win any of them, but an amazing coach. And our next guest is a coach and a mentor to CIOs around the country. So also I want to say, I said kissing booth. If you're wondering how a kissing booth fits into this, well, you have to be familiar with Lambda, Lambda, Lambda. You have to be familiar with Revenge of the Nerds, because Jerry is a data nerd. Lastly, a mint julep. A mint julep is this wonderful bourbon drink that you drink usually in May. But one of the things that makes it so special is that you muddle the sugar in the mint, because you have to sometimes understand the art of muddling through. All of those things capture very concisely and very neatly into my friend and colleague, Jerry Driessen. Jerry, welcome to AuthentiCity FM.
Well, thanks, Mike. Also, because I'm a horse guy, mint juleps, Kentucky Derby.
Perfect. I didn't even want to think weave those in together. So I want to welcome you to the program. So Jerry, you and I are friends and colleagues. We've worked together. We've known each other for a really long time. You have had a pretty interesting career. Yes, you were a prison guard, so we'll probably touch on that briefly. But one of the things that we offer our guests is a little bit of time to say, how did you come to arrive in this chair? And kind of give us very briefly sort of your career trajectory and how did you come up to land on this podcast? So over to you.
Yeah. So, Mike, you and I know each other from Hennepin County, dating back to the early 2000s. Actually, I was the CIO. I ended up being the CIO there while you were there as a director as well. But our past goes back to actually the early 2000s when I was the coordinator of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee. Fascinating title that we use the word coordination twice in the same sentence to imply that an adversarial system would be more coordinated. Kind of tells the story, I think, that we're going to talk about a little bit today. But I am a data nerd. I took that job with Hennepin County shortly after I had my master's degree. Huge into political philosophy, organizational philosophy, decision-making framework, and I turned into a data nerd because my curiosity drove me. How do I improve government using data? And I always approached my job as kind of thinking about some of my favorite theorists like Charles Lindblom, the science of muddling through, right? Talk about the muddling through. And then also James March, Herbert Simon, who talked about, how government is prone to satisficing and bounded rationality. And my favorite was Peter Senge. And so I always took a systems thinking approach to government and tried to use data, especially in criminal justice, to drive the players towards seeing those things that they could not see and helping drive outcomes that in an adversarial system, they're not necessarily inclined to look at what happens across the bow in the public defender's office between the county attorney or between the sheriff and the public defender. But they all matter because they're an interdependent system. And so from there, I did a lot of change management initiatives in Hennepin County, eventually became the CIO, and then later on became the CTO of San Jose, California. And then after 30 years, I jumped over to the private sector.
Excellent. So you have successfully made the leap from sort of professional, local government professional to being on the consulting side. And there are lots of people in our profession who weave in and out of those worlds. In fact, one of them is one of our co-hosts, our lovely and talented Corey Spiegel, recently Dr. Spiegel. And so, Jerry, tell me just real briefly, what is that transition like from being kind of the steward of process and steward of the system to being somewhat of a disruptor of systems? What's that transition been like for you?
Yeah, it's crazy. When I left San Jose, California, I was there during COVID, and San Jose, Santa Clara County was in the middle of, not only is it a really innovative area, right, in Silicon Valley, but I was there during COVID, when it was particularly trying. And then after that, I left to go to Infotech Research, where I advised CIOs from across the country in public sector. That transition was easy, right? It'd be natural because I was focusing on just advising people on a job that I had done all my life. I disrupted my own life about 8-10 months ago, where I jumped over into a software company. Now, never did I think I would be working for a software company. However, when we talk about what that software company does in actually process intelligence and that systems thinking, that's why I jumped over. I started to see a convergence in the outside actually pushing the inside in a way that I had always tried to do from the inside, like disruption from the inside, change management from the inside, driving towards system thinking. And I think that I saw a point at which technology got to a point where its ability to push change from the outside is more powerful than what I was able to do from inside.
So you use the phrase process intelligence. Let's start there as an anchoring point to have our listeners understand what you mean by that, because it is probably more of a private sector word than a typical local government bureaucratic word.
Yeah. So everyone is familiar with process. Like, everything that an organization does is made up of a series of activities that are intended to achieve a result. So think in terms of city government, right? So how they contract for something, how they procure for goods, how they purchase anything from pens, computers um, to vehicles, squad cars, etc. That's all a process, and that process has to be above board. Those pieces of that process, from issuing the purchase order, and then procuring the goods, and then making sure that they got what they actually purchased. And then there's another piece that government is required to do. Actually, all organizations are required to do. You have to match then to make sure you got what you paid for, or you got what you ordered, and that those inventories were taken in. And before you actually issue the invoice for those goods, that you can say, I was a good steward of tax dollars, and I actually paid for this, and I got that, and here it is. It's called a double match. So all of those things are recorded in a system. So what Salonis actually does, but probably by like 5 different teams. So your purchasing people, your accounting people, your finance people, et cetera. And they might be on 3 or 4 different systems. So process intelligence is taking the DNA of all those interactions with your system and actually creating a digital twin and showing you, this is what your process map looks like. This is how your deviations in process are occurring. This is how many times you're buying out of your contract process. You're issuing using a P card, or you're issuing or you're trying to buy off a vehicle that isn't the approved vehicle, and so you're paying more, et cetera. So process intelligence is just taking that digital record and showing you where your inefficiencies are, and then helping you actually understand how to fix those inefficiencies.
So, Jerry, that's a awesome process. And I think about it in the analog way that I have myself had the unfortunate experience of having to live through process mapping for a single or 2 processes. And what I picture is a conference room full of people who have big post-it note things on the wall, and we're drawing on those, and we're using little Post-it notes to talk about who's touching what process and how this all works. And it takes you, I don't know, a solid hour to get from one end to the other. And everybody sits in the room and stares in awe of this, artwork that you've just created, and then says to themselves, well, hell, that doesn't look like it's very efficient. Well, everybody, thanks for coming to the meeting. We'll see you next week. And nobody does anything with it because it's seen as overwhelming. It just took you an hour to talk about why it takes, how many people have to touch something to get something from point A to point B, let alone point Z. And everybody kind of throws their hands up because they don't feel like they can do anything about it. I'm fascinated by how AI helps that process become practical, as opposed to there's no way in hell I'm ever going to try this because it's just too hard.
Yeah, so you're describing the point I described as realizing that technology had gotten to a place where the change from outside is more powerful than inside, right? I've done that. I've implemented almost every IT system there is. I've implemented permitting systems, prison systems. I've implemented correction systems across law enforcement, prosecution. I've implemented ERP systems. And every time I did it was the same way you're describing. We would do what was called joint JAD sessions, joint application development sessions, where you move the sticky notes around. You spend usually a year and a half getting the requirements. Then you issue this fixed price bid, and you try to buy this system based on your requirements, moving those sticky notes around. And then you start to realize a couple things. Technology changed a lot during that 18 months. And so what you actually tried to pinpoint as your process did not keep up with the technology. And about 2/3 of your team that helped you move those sticky notes around is no longer there. So the process that wasn't documented doesn't hold up anymore. And so what you start to see is actually having speed as your friend. And we've gotten into, agile development and all sorts of different ways to try to crunch that development cycle down. But when we can use AI to actually go across all the different systems we use and actually replicate, like in weeks, how the process is done now, we're not as dependent on lack of documentation, lack of coordination between teams. The other thing, Phil, that at least I've seen, is oftentimes you ask people to sit in a room and you say, document our process right now. They move those sticky notes around. They don't always know. And they may know their piece of it, but they don't know how their piece of it touches your piece of it. And that is where AI really shows that invisible, like I mentioned, the criminal justice system. One of my favorite projects early on in my career was actually working with Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative and EKC Foundation, and actually decreasing the number of kids that were going to detention and hot placement, not because they were risks to public safety, but because they failed to show up for a court hearing, or they got issued a warrant because they failed to show for a probation warrant risks to public safety. But they were still filling up jails. They were still getting sent to the equivalent of juvenile prisons, right? Costing tons of money. But the process of why were we making those decisions was mostly invisible to everybody until you really started to unpack it.
So I want to pull on that one a little bit, because in our last episodes, we talked about how many of the systems that we operate are invisible. And I sort of made the reference to figuring out how to pay people and all of the inputs that go into issuing somebody a paycheck. And not one person actually knows how any of that happens. So you work for a software company and you have AI tools that do this work. What does that look like? How does we call them our AI overlords, or the bots? How do the bots get into and then remake or recapture a system to give a sense for what it does? And just for the benefit of our audience, how long does something like that take? Because I've done the value stream mapping that takes God knows how long, and it's unpleasant, and they actually don't ever want to do it again. So give me the alternative. Paint that picture for us.
Yeah, well, I'm going to start with what happens when people don't get paid, right? So we actually have
We
seen
call that chaos,
we call it,
right?
it
Cats and
happens more
dogs
than you
living
would think.
together. We don't ever want to have that situation.
And so in government, right, we have things called classification, like your job class. What are you actually? Are you a temporary employee, or are you a probationary employee? And what are those dates that actually change your status in employment? And so all of those things matter, and those are pieces of data that get captured in time, sometimes accurately, sometimes not, right? So um, when you actually, so we call those event logs. So every time you enter in a sequence of things like Mike just got promoted yesterday, there's an activity that goes into the event log, right? And it says, Mike, we call that an object. It's a thing, person, place, or thing. Think of it that way.
Yep, I'm real.
And something happens, right? So there's an event and a timestamp. So when Mike is promoted, and barring he isn't demoted and he passes his probation, that should count as the time when seniority starts to accrue. Benefit status start to change. His years in service in that classification stage that might affect his whatever pension plan that he's part of, right? And so there's all of these things might affect his benefits. All of these things start to actually create that, mining that event log and actually showing a digital twin. We've actually had a few very large client states that have migrated to new ERPs when they don't get their data migration right, and they move over to a brand new ERP that tries to push them into kind of the big box way of thinking that isn't always tailored towards union classification issues, for instance. And they miss the data management part of it. And so we're actually taking and mining the event logs to show the process as it's supposed to be. And what that then shows people is when there are disconnects in that process, you've got a gap you've got to fill. And you can use AI to fill that gap, because where's the missing information? It might be in an email. You can actually scrape emails. You could actually pull information from an Excel database or Excel spreadsheets. So you start to compile the missing events and missing information and fill that gap in. And that's when you start to see how well is your organization actually performing.
So, Jerry, the unfortunate part of what I just heard you say is that it isn't always the technology company's fault when it doesn't work. That was the nugget of information. And I think that it's interesting because we get frustrated, right? In the business of government, there is a solution for every problem, or so we're told by the various and numerous cold emails I get from any number of product providers. And they're seeking to help us, automate a system or a process or whatever as the case may be. And I think the interesting part about what you're talking about is helping us to understand what we are doing before perhaps we go out and spend 7 figures on a new ERP and buy the wrong thing. Right. And I think we've all experienced this situation where my most recent ERP implementation took 5 years. Now, admittedly, COVID was in the midst of that, but it was hell. And by the end of it, no one was excited about it. We're no longer in that space of, oh, this is going to fix every problem. It's the opposite. This thing is awful. Oh my God. Every process that we thought it could do, it can't do. And so, that pain point has always, that's, all of us city managers sit around at conferences and we commiserate about things. We commiserate about, oh, we just spent all this money and it still doesn't work. And process is getting in the way of getting it to work. And we don't even know that because we don't know what the process is.
There's so much to what you just said. I mean, number one, the technology industry is a for-profit industry. People who create technology solutions want to get economies of scale out of those solutions, which means they sell that solution to the private sector, the public sector, across all sectors. When you have specific government accountability standards, I mean, there may be new requirements that come out, and GASB requirements, new GASB requirements come out all the time that aren't necessarily programmed in. Okay, now we got to do a side system. We got to do a workaround. Over time, those workarounds start to eat you alive. So that's one thing. The other thing, though, and this ties into AI, right, is I think the way technology evolved, probably in all sectors, but especially in government, where it kind of evolved as a thing. Yeah, I guess we have to do it because maybe it creates more efficiency, but we really didn't embrace it. I mean, I was a CIO for a long time and CTO at San Jose. We didn't incorporate it into, this is part of our DNA. This is part of our operational way of being now. Not just people dependent, but also technology dependent. And we really have to understand our processes and maybe change those processes for how we want the outcomes to look. That's kind of why I brought up, the James March, Herbert Simon satisficing and bounded rationality, right? Because that's how we make decisions. And that's how we built systems, based on fragmented thinking. And so we think computers will magically figure out what we didn't know, and that doesn't happen. It just reflects what we understood the process to be. And that's why I jumped over to Celonis, because you kind of can't avoid what's right in front of you saying, I understand how you think your process works. Let me show you what your people are doing.
So over the arc of the podcast, we've talked about change being hard in government and the pace at which tech is moving now. So you're on that side of the fence now. M&A has built these big systems. So big companies buy little ones. That's normal business kind of strategy. But what advice do you have to offer to, be it city managers or IT directors or elected officials who know the buzzword is AI and we need to be doing AI? But I'm fairly certain 99% of people don't even know what that phrase means.
So a few things. So Celonis has, we have a slogan, no AI without PI. Don't run from AI, but understand your processes first and use AI to actually achieve the outcomes you want. So lean into AI, but only in the way that suits your business, right? So take those missing, process pieces that you're not accomplishing it, and apply AI to helping those be more seamless. End-to-end processes, bringing information to teams that don't necessarily have all the information, et cetera. But the other part of that is in the private sector world, we actually have a lot of agencies. So Celonis is a company that has half of the Fortune 200 companies are customers of ours, including Amazon, Kimberly-Clark, people that are shipping goods and products all over the world, right? Those companies would tell you, lean into the red. What that means is the bottom line of how reducing the number of touches on an order or decreasing the amount of time that it takes to turn some raw goods into an actual sellable product matters. So condensing that, leaning into the red, shrinking those timelines. I would say the same to government, right? Is start to really focus on what are those things that we're actually measuring? What are we trying to achieve? And how can AI help us? The other part about that is, I think if we don't, AI is going to surface a lot of that stuff anyway, and then we're going to end up playing whack-a-mole, and we're going to have to be on the defense, as opposed to actually being transparent and saying, here are our goals. Here's what's going on that we're not accomplishing our goals, but we're ahead of it and we're working on it, and we can use AI and new technology to do that. We're having a lot more states and local governments embrace us, especially out of this push for efficiency that we've been on, and really starting to get ahead of that and say, we need to own our processes. We cannot have some technology solution say that they knows our processes better than we do. We have to actually look at those. And then we can use technology to accelerate our processes, but we have to know what they are first.
So I'm going to pull at that one more thread. And it's not that it's not true in the private sector, because some of the companies you named are very customer focused, right? But government has never been truly motivated by time. Like, we talk about efficiency, but that's not a primary driver of motivation. And I think it will be interesting to hear your thoughts about how process intelligence integrates the idea of time and efficiency, and not, doing more with less kind of thing. True actual efficiency, with the idea that customer experience in government is something that matters, right? Like, we are here to serve the common good and the greater public. And that's a little more nuanced than the Fortune 5s typically view their relationships with customers.
So let me throw a couple of examples where time matters. Permitting, processing. How fast do we stand up and process building developers' permits? Those developers care deeply about that, especially when I was in San Jose, California, or now my friend in Seattle, Washington, where they have housing crisis. Matters a ton. That is a production industry. And that production industry has very independent units that are processing those pieces. Fire department, planning committee, public works, and everybody has their lanes and things they have to do. So the time across those different disciplines matters a great deal. The second, and more broadly in the customer service, and I worked on this in San Jose, was 311. Patch my pothole, get rid of graffiti. Homelessness was a huge issue out there as well. So those sorts of very visible things, they don't necessarily understand whether or not the public works department actually has enough staff to deal with the pothole right away. They also don't necessarily understand if that's a county road or a state road that they're actually indicating. But trust your roads when you can order something from Amazon and have it on your doorstep the very next day. But when you interact with government, you think something that should take a day or two takes months, weeks, or sometimes never happens. So although it isn't necessarily a bottom line in terms of commercial impact, I would say trust erodes greatly when you don't actually deliver what the public expects.
Okay, so Jerry, you know me, I know you. All of my alarm bells are raging and going off right now because, and I mean this because, right, we get that complaint all the time, right? So White Bear Avenue right now, in the last week and a half with the freeze thaw in January, has absolutely turned this thing into like just this Swiss cheese pockmarked road that you can't even drive on. And so we got the call that says White Bear's terrible. And I would have to, right. And my immediate answer is, I understand your concern. Unfortunately, it's a county road. There's nothing I can do to help you. And so, all right, that's a real, I like literally had that conversation today. So that's one, right? So there is this division of labor, and boundaries mean things because I don't have anybody that can legally go in and fill that pothole. That's number one. Number two, some of this sounds like what DOJ tried to do at the federal level. And so help me bring my temperature down and lower the alarm bells, because, right, I mean, is this somebody coming after us, after me, and we're going to have to eliminate a third of our workforce as a result of this?
Let me give you a much more friendly version that isn't DOJ, right? One of the reasons I went to San Jose, California after Hennepin County, they actually had a smart cities and service improvements committee where they would talk openly about why is it taking so long for your potholes? Why are we not dealing with homelessness? What is going wrong with the permitting process? They under the light of day. And they would be very transparent about talking in detail in a committee with council members about things. And they were very careful with the blame, because I caught myself too, it doesn't play well to the public to actually say, well, that's the county. They don't care. Tax dollars, whatever, blame it on someone else, right? That doesn't necessarily win you points, but actually helping the public understand and level set expectations of what can and cannot be done, and offering them the ability to actually have input on that process and understand a little bit more does a couple things. It increases public participation, and it also starts to help with increased accountability. Because the other side of that is coordination across multiple departments isn't always easy, right? So understanding what is or isn't happening, what those processes within public works or permitting or whatever, not everybody knows. And so you shed a little light on that and you start to solve those after a while. So I don't think that government efficiency has to be this patriarchal, draconian kind of, sledgehammer. I think it's just good government. Did that help with your blood pressure?
I'm a mess. So
I was going to say, I think we're just going to lean into Mike's blood pressure being high. That's what is it? It's Wednesday. Of course it is. It's just where we are. Jerry, I want to hop back a bit to something you said before, which is that technology needs to be part of an organization's DNA. I will tell you that one of the struggles as a manager that I have had is getting an organization to understand that IT is not your third call. They are the one you call before you're even thinking about what you want to start doing, right? That's when you start to engage the folks who understand that you don't just buy the thing and hope that it's going to work when they plug it in the wall. You actually talk about how strategically it makes sense in the organization, and there's purpose and there's idea behind why you do it. And that is arguably a harder thing to do than I would guess. As a person who is not a subject matter expert, I'm a generalist as a manager. I'm always like, well, of course you're going to call the people who know how this thing works before you buy it, right? Because they're going to have to support it after you buy it. And obviously that is not the path that a lot of things take. I'm curious, and maybe this is a little self-serving for me. I have a new IT director starting in a couple weeks, and I'm very excited. I think the organization is very excited. And he will walk in the door and he will immediately be bombarded with, why doesn't the printer work? Instead of, how do we do our process? How do we strategically buy what we think is going to work for us? And I'd like your opinion on that before I buy it. Like, give me, as the guy who did it for 30 years, who probably fought a lot of battles to get in front of things instead of being left behind, what's the path toward helping build that DNA strand of technology as part of what we do?
I had an advantage and a disadvantage. I actually wasn't raised up in technology. I came out of criminal justice courting committee, and then I was a juvenile services director for a bit. And I had all these transformation initiatives handed to me, go improve the outcomes in this area, this thing, so I approached it from a business perspective, and I always use technology to help. I need to stand up a system to help me get the data I need, and then I need to reinvent my process along the way. So it was always organic. That was my advantage. So I always looked at technology as an enabler of better government. Some folks look at technology, though, as it's a cybersecurity risk, or it is a printer that has to run, or a network that has to be up. Those are also true. So that was not necessarily my upbringing, was, not a deep network background or standing up servers or any of that operational stuff. I would say, and the other piece, this is the thing that gets me all the time. I hear a lot of higher ups in public sector say, thank God you have control over IT because I really don't understand IT. That, to me, is a red flag because I think that means that either the IT director, CIO, hasn't stepped far enough to actually helping the organization understand why IT is actually a strategic arm of the government. And also, it also is a red flag saying that leader abdicated that IT would just run on its own without connection to what really was mattering in the business, right? So that is the biggest thing that I think, and with AI, it's only going to get worse, right? Because people are going to rely on AI and AI hallucinates. So if you don't actually understand your processes, you should not be surprised by what you get back. So, and you cannot abdicate responsibility for the outcomes of your organization. You have to own those. You have to own your processes. Technology is just a way to make those processes run in a more automated fashion, but you can't let go of your processes. You own them. Is that helpful?
It is helpful. It is, that I think what you've said is, why it resonated as you said it is that I do think a lot of people just see IT as a thing that they have to either deal with or don't deal with because I don't get it. So what do I care? Whether we're talking about public works or public safety, or anywhere in between, there's a real perspective and a real struggle, I think, to understand the kind of the organic nature of technology. And it is very similar to how a body functions. And I think we've tried to talk a little bit about that. Like these things are all interconnected. And sometimes you want to ignore the thing over here that's happening because it's not my part of the body. But the thing over here that's happening really is important for your part of the body, even though you don't think so. And one of the goals that I have in as we onboard our new director and as we really kind of take a new approach to IT. And I'll tell you, I think your point is exactly right. IT was basically run the financial system, and that's your thing. And then we all kind of tripped and fell into email and shared drives and all of the structural things that came next. And because of that, it's a little bit like how development sometimes happens in this haphazard way, and you have a result at the end that isn't, if you had sat down and thought about it, you'd never have built it like that. But now you have it. And so you have to tear it apart piece by piece and put it back together in the right way. And that, like we were talking about before, that's the scary part. That's the hard part. I don't have that kind of time. I've got services to provide. I can't think about my systems or my processes to get us to a better place. And that's where what I'm really hoping to set my new director on the path of is to help the organization recognize that you can't just forget about it. I'm here. I'm going to be next to you. I'm going to be in the same trenches with you. I'm going to understand your process and you're going to understand why I'm there. And I know that it's a little rose-colored glasses, that it's going to be something that, I snap my fingers and suddenly it works. But that is, in my view, the only way that we can succeed in this time. To your point, with AI and everything else that's kind of barreling toward us, how else can we do it?
Yeah, the other thing that is interesting, I'm going to make Mike's blood pressure go back up again because I'm going to say Doge again. The interesting thing about Doge was the way they used AI. They did not do it in a vertical fashion, meaning they didn't just unleash, let's find inefficiencies just within the confines of HUD or just within the confines of human services, right? They went at it from a systemic kind of approach. And whether you're the reality is AI doesn't know organizational boundaries, right? They don't care about bureaucracy, which is almost a beautiful thing and scary. because outcomes are what matter to our public, right? That's what we're here to do. We're here to deliver better government, not necessarily government that matches our bureaucracy, right? So when you start to actually, and I kind of hinted at this with Lean Into the Red, but when you start to look at outcomes and how to have best embrace technology that matches your outcomes, you can start to look systematically at the whole organization, not just what the police department needs or what environmental services needs or what transportation needs, right? And so the reality is, and I think we all see that, there are overlaps between those bureaucratic boundaries that have big impact. Like it matters how transit works to people who need jobs, to people who need social services, to people, we have big schools of thought around, disparities in healthcare, disparities in criminal justice, and the causality behind that, right? And so we know those things, but we're not very good at systematically solving them yet. I do think that AI and other tools really can help us get there, but we have to be open to it. We have to be transparent about it and not be defensive and not say AI bad, because AI is not necessarily bad. It can be bad, but instead lean into how are we going to use AI to actually address things that aren't working the way they should.
So I feel like we've built a disruption cocktail recipe at this point. So I'm gonna put Doge back on the table for a reason that I'll get to. Mike's alarm bells will probably go off again. Bill will need his sticky notes. We've talked about AI. I think in the last episode, Mike brought up a great comment about, we went all in on body cameras, and now you've got the eye camera, the next gen stuff that's coming, and all the things that are happening. And in my state today, the state bodies, the political bodies, are controlled by one party, and the governor announced an effort to cut $3 billion from property tax. And that's going to come from local governments, right? That's the only way you save the money. And if you're a city manager or department head, like that feels like a really big hatchet in an era that already feels really out of control and chaotic from every standpoint, tech, federal government, just life, right? And so instead of leaning into the fear, what advice or kind of boundaries can you put around why now is the perfect time in a department head or an executive team meeting for the team to sit down and say, now's the time that we're going to use AI or tech-enhanced process intelligence to break it ourselves before we're forced to be broken by someone else?
Your last episode, you brought up healthcare. I mean, pick an area, right, where there are so many different jurisdictions and private sector and public sector and safety net hospitals and insurers and payees. I mean, you talk about the different, arguably questionable complexity that exists in that kind of dynamic. How can we improve healthcare outcomes and to the actual people that benefit, like the people that are on health insurance, and actually start to drive costs down? So how do we have that conversation? I mean, that is an area ripe for that conversation. I think with all the stuff going on with HR1 and public benefits, like it or don't like it, with, Medicaid and also with human services, social services, the reality is that also forces conversations about service delivery models. Minnesota, which I live in, is one of 10 states that has a county provided and state supervised systems. Not all states run that way. Some are straight up state does social services. And that's that. So is it time to have that conversation about what is a more efficient and effective model? My fear is we'll start to point fingers at each other and say, my hope is that we'll actually use it to have informed conversations about how to actually improve service delivery of the things that we're supposed to do, like make sure that needy people are getting food and medical assistance, right? That's the end game. But that goes back to process intelligence and understanding, is that happening today? Is it happening the way you think it should be happening today? How much waste is happening in there? Or, to kind of be a little sensitive, how much fraud is happening? We're getting asked that question a lot at Solanas. I'm going on a trip next week to the state just to talk about that for a week with a bunch of state senators. So it's happening everywhere where that conversation is coming up. And I think it's not a bad conversation because we are stewards of tax dollars. We are responsible for helping make sure that the safety net is intact and that we're helping people in need. But if we don't actually know how our government is performing today, how can we possibly say, everything's fine here, don't look here, right? Or point the finger at someone else? I think it is time to start unpacking some of the complexity in those systems.
Jerry, I think as you're talking, the things that keep ringing in my brain are the anxieties that come from these kinds of conversations, right? Because what we're saying is, and maybe we're not saying this directly, but what we're saying is we have to change. We have to do something differently. And the moment you say those kinds of words is the moment that people get into a space of protectionism, right? So what you just said, what I was talking about before, from the standpoint of like the way our bureaucracy has evolved over time. I think if we had, 100 years ago in my state, in Illinois, we have school districts that are, elementary and then high school. And I worked in a community at one time that had 30,000 residents and 6 school districts serving that 30,000 person population. And you're like, why the hell did we do that? Well, because it grew up over time. And then the process is where the system is what it is. And you say, well, hey, this isn't a good idea. Let's consolidate these things. Let's move these things together. And now everybody flips out because, well, I didn't move into this school district so that I could deal with that school district's problem. I moved here so I could have this small pond, and I wanted to be a big fish in it. And that is no different than the struggles that our organizations are going through from the standpoint of, Corey brought it up again last episode. We've talked about it before. Fire departments, they're not fighting fires all that much anymore. They are certainly doing that from time to time. It's a lot of paramedic services. Is it best that we are structuring these things around municipal boundary lines, which themselves are sawtooth angles and don't make any real sense because they're the product of a series of annexation agreements that were politically driven one way or another? Of course not. But how do you break something that's just entrenched in what we do? And I think when we talk about technology and the way it can actually help us do more, and I'm not saying the technology itself, but the systems improvement, the process stuff, all of a sudden people are like, hold on a second. You're telling me I'm doing it wrong? I've been doing it this way, and no one's ever said that before, so you're wrong. You don't know what you're talking about, right? So this is the great struggle of this time. We've said it on this podcast before. The concept of Doge, I have a lot of problems with the way it rolled out. The concept, though, isn't new. We've talked about it before. Reinventing government, all sorts of different things over the years have been around the same concept, which is how do we become better stewards of the tax dollar that is finite and growing more so. So it's a unique and perhaps fun time to be working through this. But man, I tell you, we're going to find ourselves up against walls a whole lot.
Yeah, wasn't it called National Performance Reform about 30 years ago? Yeah. And I think who was that? That wasn't a Republican, I don't think. Anyway, yeah, that's why I go back to good government. But the other piece, though, Phil, I cannot reiterate the word transparency enough because, and go back to the city of San Jose, California, and their smart cities and service improvement. service improvements committee where anybody from the public can come into the committee, see how the sausage is made. Most people are afraid of that. They don't, we, the government stewards, don't really think the public cares about the sausage, how the sausage is made. The reality, though, is I think they do. And I think that when they start to think, why is it that Amazon can get something to my doorstep in 2 minutes, but government can't fix a pothole? I think we owe it to them to kind of talk it through and say, here's what's realistic and what isn't. And I think there's power in that. The second thing that I will say is, I think the civil servants that are out there fixing the potholes or protecting our street, they're already on board with this reform. They're not necessarily the ones who are afraid of this change, right? Because I think they want outcomes. So I think the organizations, and as they're structured and as they're budgeted, that's a lot of unpacking. And I think that's where it becomes challenging. But I think our staff actually get empowered when they actually see that it's not their fault, that they don't suck, that they actually are trying to do a good job. And being transparent about that actually shows that and gives them power back with the data. So that's my counter to your point of that. I think public servants are public servants. Something I've always believed in and still do. I think they want to do good things for the society and for civilization.
So as Phil opened that set of comments up, and I wrote this down before you said what you just said, but it's the politics of control versus the proof of the process. And I think we're switching which lane now. Politics can be internal and it can be elected, right? There's going to be, either by willingness or by force, a requirement to do it differently. And that's where I think companies like yours, the expertise you have on both sides of the table, right? You lived in these huge organizations and were still able to innovate. It's going to go faster. It's going to be scarier. It's going to be more in public, right? We're living with worlds where citizens can come tape you and turn you into something you weren't, and all the AI stuff. So we're like, the deepfake stuff is terrifying, I think, from a public sector standpoint. But we're going to move through this transition. And so I think this is a moment for leaders in local government to say, either it's going to be done to me, or I'm going to take this brave, scary step and start to dig into exactly the stuff you're doing.
So I'm gonna add on to that a little bit, Corey. So I appreciate you sharing that perspective, because I there was something that there is a glimmer of hope in this, and that is the no one is right. If you're looking for somebody to help you, stop looking, because it's us. Like, it's our responsibility to start to lead this transformation. I'm going to make a generalization that is rooted in a lot of years of experience. And so apologies to all of the city managers who have some age associated with them. But it's been my experience that they're maybe not on the cutting edge of what's going on in terms of technology. They have been promoted and gotten jobs because they've been good at what they used to do. And then they've grown up into this thing. And now we've got this brave new world, Jerry. What are some sources of information, or where can they go to kind of get a guidebook into, like, okay, I'm dipping my toe into this transformational thing. How do I get comfortable understanding, and what's some of the terminology that I've got to get used to?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. We're actually doing a lot in this space too, with the McKinseys and the Accentures and the Deloittes and publishing. I mean, it is amazing how much research is getting developed right now around systemic reform driven by AI. I guess the biggest piece, though, that I would say is, don't treat AI as something that should be feared, or that's something that you should have an instinct to block. Be curious about it, and be curious about how it is the next chapter. Technology has evolved, right? I mean, when I started my career a long time ago, I mentioned my first thing where people thought I was an IT genius, which I was not, was helping Hennepin County get off of its mainframe criminal justice system and move to a modern state-of-the-art system. I didn't come from IT, right? But that mainframe grew up from data cards, people in the basement literally punching data cards. That was not that long ago. It wasn't that long ago when Hennepin County and many others didn't know that laptops were an essential tool in the workforce, right? So, I mean, we've been through this. Technology keeps coming. But have that curiosity of not how is a risk. And I'm seeing a lot of literature on, AI and deepfakes and its risk and all of that. But ask the other question. How can it be leveraged to actually advance what we've always been signed up for? And so be curious about that. There's plenty of people doing good work out there. I mentioned McKinsey, Accenture. There's several others that are doing great work. We're doing great work. We feel good about the work that we're doing. We're offering podcasts all the time. We're doing one, actually a webinar on the 26th about welfare reform with McKinsey. So there's not a shortage of resources to help. It's more about your mindset. How are you thinking about what you're going to do with technology? Are you going to be still a little afraid of it, or it really is here to stay, which I'd argue AI is. And now we got to figure out how to embrace it in. Flip that mindset and then lean into the great work that's happening in how to actually create the next chapter of government.
Well, that was almost a perfect segue into our next episode. So for our audience and for our listeners, so we have spent a little bit of time thinking about January. We've talked about we introduced this topic of disruption. This whole conversation has been about systems, whether they're visible or invisible, and the importance of understanding how our system design actually changes and helps outcomes be achieved. Our next episode is going to be around signals, right? Trying to discern what's coming next. How do you discern what's a signal and what's just chatter and noise? And then the last piece is around stewardship. So really, we're excited about what this has been, and we're excited about this conversation. I say all that to say, like and subscribe and give us some feedback if you're liking this content. We want to be able to make sure that we're delivering something of value to you. Our outcome is that our listeners get something out of this. And I say all of that to say, Jerry, one of the bits that we do on this podcast is we give you a chance to say, what questions do you have of us? We work in the local government sphere. We're reasonably capable people. We've got pretty good networks. Phil's very famous on LinkedIn. What questions do you have for us?
Yeah, I'm curious. I know some from some of the friends I have, City of Seattle, City of San Jose. They're like developing collaborative like AI leadership forums across the nation. What I don't know is how far their reach is. What is kind of your sense, ICMA, other places, of how many people are leaning into AI versus treating it as we're still not sure?
We have a lot of discussions around AI in professional settings. ICMA is doing an entire local government reimagined conference focused only on AI this spring. And I would tell you in Illinois, where I am, we talk about it a lot and we talk around the edges of it. I don't know that we've had even the kind of conversation that we've had this evening with you in any of those conversations. A lot of it has focused on what is this new thing called AI and what does it mean and how shall we leverage it to improve our outcomes, and or let's be terrified of it because it's going to deep fake us all into, craziness on YouTube. So I would tell you, I think there are certainly cities that are deeply focused on how to use it well. There are some managers who are champions of it as a tool. and as a way to improve what they're doing. A lot of what we were talking about tonight. I do not think that that is the majority. I think a lot of folks are still terrified of it. A lot of people think it's cheating. A lot of people think it is going to take over the world. And so therefore, if you just ignore it, it won't. Right. And so I think it is one of those things. And I don't know that it was, when we think about like the advent of websites and email and how that has evolved and changed the way we did things, that wasn't nearly as frightening. Although, I did my master's thesis on how e-government was going to solve all of life's problems. And somehow I wrote 75 pages on implementing an e-billing process. Like this was this most bizarre, amazing opportunity. And I remember having conversations with the village manager in the organization I was working for as an intern. And his comment to me was, unless we can fire 8 people, I'm not sure why this is worth doing. And so, like, you think about that 2002 perspective to where we are today, I do think, we're a lot better than we used to be, but we've got a long way to go.
Corey, you're going to go next because you're the most proficient, and this is a sweet spot for you. This is a home run for you.
So I think the biggest challenge, and Jerry, this would be interesting to get your perspective on this after we roll through, but is that the private sector's understanding of what AI really is, right? And when we get to the business, your examples of Amazon, it's just fundamentally different, because I think the conversations, at least for the first year or two in local government, were, oh, ChatGPT can write my RFP now. And that's the depth of understanding. So I would say, and again, to the point, the big cities where you have big tech influences, yeah, it's baked in. That's how those communities are. But we're here in the heartland, and that's less common here. And so I think the challenge is actually understanding what AI is. It's not just Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT, right? It is a fundamentally different way of processing data in medicine and insurance and government across all spectrums. And I don't think local government en masse actually understands that part of it yet, because that's kind of antithetical to how local governments run. And so I think there needs to be some common knowledge around, no, this actually is about business processes. This is about data. This is about transparency. This is about efficiency. And while all of those words have been around local government, they haven't been around in the way that you so very well articulated tonight. This idea of compression, this idea of ownership and responsibility and transparency in a way that actually matters, because unfortunately, government still is about the politics of power.
You have to respond to that. Everyone knows the MIT study, 95% of the AI initiatives have failed, right? We actually did a presentation, Salonis did, at Gartner CIO Summit last August. And but yet in the private sector, they're all in and continue to be all in. The difference, though, is AI is not a chatbot. AI is not a surface level thing. It's actually pivoting and dealing with automating your processes, decreasing your, orders to touches, or your timeline to, from manufacturer to goods produced, or maximizing, optimizing your payment cycles so that you're not paying it too early unless there's a payment discount and you actually know the difference, right? And so you're monitoring every process and you're using AI to actually achieve the outcomes you want. That's when people are getting a lot out of AI, except that most organizations don't know their processes. So sorry.
No,
for the rant.
It's a good rant, and it's actually it's a really helpful sort of pretty provocative statement from Corey to say, like, I have been using it at a very base level because I've been using it to write RFPs and like cut my work time in, from 2 hours of things down to, in some cases minutes. And so I've been trying to just be more productive using those tools. I'm going to say a couple of things. So the sort of the prototypical ICMA member tends to be a manager in a smaller community, kind of in that 10,000 population manager, and they don't have deep benches and they don't have deep pools for, tapping into some kind of tech expert the way that a bigger city, you just said Seattle, I would imagine Seattle probably has 100 people who are working on this, and it's sort of like it's baked into kind of how they operate. In my own organization, we're doing this. Innovation team concept where, and I mean this, we're going to kind of pick younger, more thoughtful people who are maybe digital natives who can come in, and we're going to say, what is one tool out there in the AI space that you want to play with? We will get you that tool, and I'm going to give them some arbitrary time frame, right? 10 weeks, 12 weeks, and say, in the next 12 weeks, show me something cool. There's a lot of rules and a lot of process because we're government. So right, you can only spend X number of hours per week because you still have your day job that you got to produce. But carving out time and space so people can do that. So I actually don't know what we're going to get. I know I'm committed to making an investment in giving people tools that I don't really know what they will do, but I'm willing to take a risk that people who are creative and who are smart and who are eager are going to find a way to make it useful for them. So that's maybe the one thing that I'm going to try. But the whole thing sort of, I only understand it at a kind of a surface level. And so these conversations that talk about a little bit deeper understanding sort of invisible systems has been kind of helpful for me. So that's kind of what we're doing.
So, Jerry, I want to get your thoughts on something because as we walk through that, when I first imagined what AI could do, and Mike, this goes to your innovation team. In a perfect world, I'm like, I should be able to look up my property address, regardless of the county that keeps track of property tax and the assessment side, the city, and back to the enterprise systems, right? So my sewer bill's in one system, police calls are in another system, code enforcement calls are in another system. Can and will, that's probably the bigger question, big tech work to collaborate across bridges? Because not all of those systems talk to each other. They are also fairly parochial in that this is my box. Because when I think of how it could be used very powerfully, if you could do that at the house level and to really understand where your services are going, where those gaps are, that to me is where the magic happens in local government. But that also requires some of those very big GovTech companies to be willing to be open to a better outcome for the constituents than just protecting the box the system's in.
Yeah. So I'll give you my company's line on that. We actually call it 3-year process. Stop getting trapped by those box solutions that actually incentivizes you to build your organization like they're designed, not how you should be designed, right? Know your process for your process and get out ahead of that. So that's one piece. I don't know that you're going to get the tech companies to say. In fact, I think most of the big tech companies are starting to see that big box software solutions are kind of dying. That is not where they're putting their money. They're putting their money into data centers. That's where they're putting their money. Watch the trend. So, because the other thing is you can build an app. In the time I go get a drink, I could build an app by talking to my phone to go get a glass of water, right? You can just say, build me an app to do X, Y, Z, right? So that whole process is just getting streamlined. And over time, you'll probably see modularization. That's a big topic in the software system. But here's the other back to government, though. I think I'm still convinced. You see government respond like when first big data became a thing. What did we do? We created data officers, chief data officers. That's what we need. They're going to solve our problems, right? But our data, then we launched this bureaucratic effort like data governance and trying to figure out our data and, how much payback was that? And now we're kind of creating AI officers, and some places have chief privacy officers, and I would argue not enough of them. And here's why. I think we have to have an amalgamation. Number one, we have to be committed to, we're going to use data to improve government, and just stop there. Number two, I think that we, in this country, have to embrace data practice standards, data privacy standards. I've been convinced of that for a while. GDPR is not a bad thing. There are only 2 states that have that level of privacy. It should be a national issue, but that's probably not necessarily the form. But I think privacy is another thing, because back to your point about looking across systems, depending on what state you are, they're probably got different definitions of what data they're going to release. Is your address private? Some states would say yes. This state would say, Minnesota being the state, would say, if you have a reason or you're opting out, yes, you can opt out, say that you're a victim of domestic abuse or have an order for protection. You need that information kept from people, who owns the house. So there are different, that's part of what gets in the way too, is policy.
You just made my blood pressure go up again. I got nervous again talking about data privacy. So I'm going to need the defib paddles eventually as we talk about this. So I love rainbows and unicorns, and everything's going to be awesome, like the Lego movie says, and it tells us. So Jerry, give me something that you are hopeful about in the next 6 months, in the next year, in the next 18 months, because you understand our world and you understand that world. What are you hopeful about?
Yeah, I mean, the whole reason I came to Salonis is again, seeing that the external change agent is more forceful than the internal changes. I've been doing this for 30 years, where I would jump from one project to the next. I was seen as a transformation person before we were using the word transformation. And but it was one vertical at a time, and it was people dependent. It was dependent on me and whatever team. And did it stick after I left, or did the organization, like a rubber band, come back and snap back to I think I'm proud to say most of the time it did not. But I think as we start to create more transparency in government, my hope is that it will reach new levels of engagement, that'll actually increase people wanting to participate and give a shit about government and civility and society again, and actually be part of a community. I think that I'm a big believer that if I don't understand something, I'm less likely to trust it. But if I start to understand it better, and the reality is most people don't understand government very well. And if we start to remove that amorphous nature about government, it'll increase trust, and trust will lead to more participation, more sense of community, more sense of civic interest. That is my hope.
I would say,
Did that bring your blood pressure down, Mike? I hope it did.
Like a
we'll
little
push
bit.
it. We'll find a way to
No
push it back up.
unicorns.
Yeah.
I would say the thing that I'm hopeful about, and what you just pointed to, is that if that's going to happen, it's going to happen at the local level. And maybe it may not get too much higher than that as we move up the strata of government structure. But I mean, I think that's in our DNA at the local level, is how do you make it such that people recognize the value, the impact, the importance of the work that happens at the local level. And it is the level of government that impacts your daily life as much as anything. And to your point, if there's trust, people believe in it. They appreciate it. They're grateful for it. If there isn't, they're running to the next place. They're taking to the Facebook group, or they're showing up at a council meeting and screaming at Mike because they don't know that they just want to raise his blood pressure. That's really what it is. It's just fun. But that is where I do think this care, to your point before, so many of our employees actually genuinely care that they are making somebody's life better. and are hoping to do that. And I think if we can cultivate that and continue to say, look, there are ways to do that that maybe we haven't explored because technology can help us get there. Maybe that makes everybody a little bit more excited to try it.
Okay, so the other bit that we have on our podcast is we're going to give you the final word, Jerry. So if somebody is interested in learning more about you, or they want to have a follow up, or they, right, or they're just curious, how do they get in touch with you? How do they approach you? How do they learn? And then you get the final word on the podcast.
So a couple things. First, I'm going to give a shout out to a hackathon we're doing with the University of Minnesota, actually, January 30th and 31st, where we have the Carlson School of Management working with our software and actually using it to, it's called a Hackathon for Good, or Data for Good, I think, at the University of Minnesota. So plug there. Secondly, j.driessen@celonis.com. And we're happy to talk. We are very active, like I said, in giving webinars. You can Google us. It's actually a profound, if you just go to celonis.com, or if you Google Celonis in Oklahoma, or Celonis in Georgia, or Celonis in Maryland, you'll be pretty amazed at how much we're starting to really get traction very fast. I mean, we're a company that started out very much in the private sector with SAP in Germany, grew to 1,350 mostly commercial clients. Started out heavy with Siemens and BMW and Mercedes, because they're also German. And then now we're in New York in the World Trade Center, and we're expanding into government. So if you're interested in learning more about Celonis, do some research on it, and you can certainly reach out to me again at j.driessen@celonis.com.
So, Jerry, I want to say thank you. So I get that this is a little bit esoteric, right? This conversations that we're having around disruption, and when you say the word process and you say the word systems, I think a lot of people sort of they don't know what it means, and so they sort of like do one of these things and like, yeah, I know things happen, but that happens in the magic box over here, and it's a reminder that we are actually the owners of the box, and we better know what the hell we're doing inside of it. So thank you for being here to help us.
Yeah, no, that I'm a nerd. You knew that coming in, and I love where we're trying to go. I mean, we'll see, right? We have one thing, Mike, just another shameless plug, is we have 20 to 30 major universities in this country teaching process intelligence and using Celonis. So they're actually gearing up to train students to start thinking systematically about. So this to me is the new business intelligence. This is like, if business intelligence was reflective and looking at data as it existed, how do we actually predict and model where we want to go? And that's when AI becomes powerful. So universities are starting to teach what we're doing, which is pretty cool, including the University of Minnesota.
So as a judge of the hackathon coming up in January 30th and 31st, I will be there. I will be adorned in some sort of crazy outfit, because that's how the bit works. But Corey, this is right in your wheelhouse. Will you bring us home, please?
Yeah. So Jerry, thanks I had no idea what we were getting into. And I have more thoughts as we close out this episode than I did when we started. So thank you for your time. I think more importantly, we'd like to invite you back for maybe 6 months from now, because I think we can all agree that 6 months from now, the world's going to look different. We're not sure how, but I'm fairly certain it will. And so I think it would be great to have you back and to see where your firm has evolved in the area of government, where government has evolved. ICMA's Local Government Reimagined AI Conference will be passed. And I think it would be a great time to check in if you would be willing to come back and chat with us again.
Absolutely. This is fun.